On November 25th, 1177, on the hot, dusty plains of the Holy Land, a battle unfolded that would forever be seared into the history of the Crusades. On this day, a 16-year-old boy suffering from severe leprosy, who could barely sit on a horse, faced the greatest Muslim commander of his time, Saladin, and won. This is the story of how, against all expectations, the tide of battle turned, how a young, sick king became a hero, and how a handful of Crusader knights saved the Kingdom of Jerusalem from certain destruction. The roots of this story reach back several decades to the events of the First Crusade. In 1099, when the Crusaders captured Jerusalem, they established the Kingdom of Jerusalem, which for the next 90 years was the center of Christian presence in the Holy Land. This kingdom, together with 4 Crusader states, the Principality of Antioch, the County of Tripoli, and the County of Edessa, formed what seemed a fragile yet surprisingly resilient network that resisted the surrounding Muslim powers. But by 1177, the situation had changed dramatically. The Muslim world, which had previously been divided into fragmented and rival emirates and sultanates, was now beginning to unite under an exceptionally talented leader. Salah ad-Din Yusuf ibn Ayyub, or as the Christians knew him, Saladin, became Sultan of Egypt in 1169, then gradually extended his power to Syria and Mesopotamia. His goal was clear: to unite the Muslim world and drive the Christians from the Holy Land. Saladin was no ordinary commander. His contemporaries, even his Christian opponents, acknowledged his refined strategic vision, military talent, and, unusually for that era, his relative humanitarian goodwill, even toward his enemies. A man of Kurdish origin, he knew that only through patience, cunning, and consistent pressure could he achieve his goal. During 1176 and 1177, he gradually encircled the Kingdom of Jerusalem, capturing key fortresses and weakening the Crusader states. Meanwhile, the Kingdom of Jerusalem was in a critical situation. In 1174, King Amalric V died, and the throne was inherited by his 13-year-old son, Baldwin IV. But Baldwin IV was no ordinary king. Already in childhood, it became clear that he suffered from leprosy, a disease that was then incurable and brought terrible suffering. The contemporary chronicler William of Tyre, who was the young king's tutor, poignantly describes the moment when he realized his pupil's illness. Once, when the noble boys were scratching and pinching each other in play, the other children cried out in pain, but Baldwin made not a single sound. When I asked him the reason, he admitted that he felt no pain at all. Then I realized the terrible truth. Leprosy slowly destroyed the young king's body. By 1177, he could barely use one of his hands, his face was deformed, and riding became increasingly difficult. Yet this boy, who knew he didn't have much time left, led his kingdom with incredible willpower and courage. His inner strength and charismatic personality enchanted the knights around him, who knew that a dying boy was leading them, yet were willing to give their lives for him. In the autumn of 1177, Saladin decided the time had come for the decisive blow. At the end of October, he assembled a massive army from Egypt and marched north toward Jerusalem. Estimates suggest his army numbered between 26,000 and 30,000 men, which by contemporary standards was a huge force. This army included Egypt's elite Mamluk cavalry, Syrian contingents, and numerous Bedouin light cavalry units. Saladin's plan was brilliant in its simplicity. While the main Crusader army was stationed in the north, around Tiberias and Safed, he would quickly invade from the south, from Egypt, plunder and destroy the southern territories of the kingdom, then besiege Jerusalem itself before the Crusaders could do anything about it. If successful, the Christian presence in the Holy Land could end that very winter. Intelligence reports quickly reached Jerusalem that Saladin's army had crossed the border. King Baldwin IV acted immediately. He sent urgent messages everywhere to gather as many knights and soldiers as possible. But the situation was desperate. The kingdom's main force, including Raymond, Count of Tripoli, and Odo de Saint-Amand, Grand Master of the Templars, along with significant contingents, were fighting in the north around Hama. There was no time to wait for them. The king gathered in Jerusalem everything he could: the city's garrison, a few knights who happened to be there, and a few dozen knights of the Hospitaller order. In total, perhaps at most 500 cavalry and a few thousand infantry. This was absurd. Confronting Saladin's enormous army with such a small force seemed suicidal. But Baldwin knew he had no choice. If he allowed Saladin to freely plunder the southern part of the kingdom, it would not only cause massive material destruction, but would also break Christian morale. He had to try to slow down, harass the enemy, at least until the main Crusader army could return from the north. In mid-November, Baldwin called his soldiers together. Contemporary chronicles write that when the young king, who could barely stand because of his illness, was helped onto his horse and appeared before his soldiers, such silence fell that you could almost hear the men's heartbeats. The king did not give a long speech. He simply said, "Brothers, I know we are few, and I know the enemy is mighty. But God is with us, and we cannot let danger threaten the city of Christ's tomb. Whoever comes with me knows what he risks. Whoever wishes to stay will suffer no harm. But I am going." Not a single knight stayed. Everyone followed the king. In mid-November, the small Crusader army set out from Jerusalem heading south. Meanwhile, Saladin advanced from the Negev desert, and his army burned and plundered the area around Ramla, then continued north toward Ascalon. The Sultan was absolutely confident. His spies reported that the main Crusader force was far away, and he thought he would at most face a small garrison, which he could easily crush. Baldwin's army reached the fortress of Ascalon, which was in Christian hands, around November 20th. The king held a council with his leaders there. Roger de Moulins, Marshal of the Hospitaller Order, practically begged the king not to go further. "Your Majesty, we are too few. If we clash with Saladin now, we will all die, and then no one will defend Jerusalem." But Baldwin remained adamant. He said, "If we turn back now, Saladin will know we are cowards. He will advance, and nothing will stop him. But if we show him now that we are not afraid, perhaps he will reconsider." This was, of course, not entirely honest. Baldwin knew that a battle would be almost suicidal, but he also knew he had no other choice. At dawn on November 25th, the Crusader army continued south toward the region of Montgisard. This area, located northwest of Ascalon, was flat, open plain, ideal terrain for cavalry battles. Crusader scouts soon reported that Saladin's army was also nearby, heading northeast. If you enjoyed how this breathtaking story unfolded, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Many more exciting medieval battles and adventures await us, and you shouldn't miss a single moment. But returning to our story, Saladin was meanwhile surprisingly careless. He moved his army in a long, loose marching column, as he did not at all expect to encounter serious resistance. The front of the great army had almost reached the vicinity of Ibelin, while the rear guard still lagged far behind. The Sultan's personal guard and the elite Mamluk cavalry were with him in the middle of the army, but the various contingents marched scattered, not in battle readiness. King Baldwin and his leaders recognized the opportunity. According to Crusader scout reports, Saladin's army was scattered, in a vulnerable position. If they struck quickly, they might attack by surprise before the enemy could pull itself together. This seemed insane, 500 knights attacking 20 to 30,000 soldiers, but it still offered more hope than a frontal clash. The Crusader army formed up around Montgisard on the afternoon of November 25th. The knights received their final blessing. The king, who had become so weakened that his soldiers had to help him onto his horse and hold him there, now brought forth the relic of the true cross, which Heraclius, Patriarch of Jerusalem, had brought with him. The knights knelt before it and swore that even if they died, they would win or at least deliver such a blow to the enemy that he would never forget. Patriarch Heraclius, a controversial figure whom many contemporaries later considered guilty of moral weakness, but who on this day was undoubtedly brave, blessed the knights and told them, "Brothers, remember that Judas Maccabeus also performed a miracle when he faced the multitudes with only a few men. Today we too will perform a miracle, for the Lord is with us." Around 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the Crusader army set off. Roger de Moulins, the Hospitaller Marshal, led the first charge. The knights, though few, formed a wedge formation, the classic formation of heavy cavalry charge. The Templar and Hospitaller Knights positioned themselves at the point, behind them, the secular knights, and on the flanks, the lightly armed sergeants. The direction of attack was brilliant. They did not head toward the front or rear of the Muslim army, but straight toward the middle, where Saladin's personal guard and main force were. If they could disrupt the order there, they might confuse the entire enemy army. The Crusader charge kicked up massive dust on the dry plain. The Muslim scouts who spotted them first ran back to alert the Sultan, but Saladin did not believe the report at first. He knew the main Crusader force was far away, and he thought this was at most a minor raid or disturbance. He did not order immediate battle readiness. This mistake almost cost him his life. When the Hospitaller Knights descended upon the Muslim center, the chaos was total. The heavily armored knights, arriving at full gallop, simply broke through the loose Muslim lines. The Mamluk guards tried to confront them, but the surprise and the force of the charge were overwhelming. Saladin himself almost fell into captivity. Contemporary Arab historians, including Ibn al-Athir, describe the moment when the Sultan realized the danger. The Franks rushed upon us like lions. In an instant, our soldiers jumped aside, and I saw the Crusader Knights charging straight toward us. The Sultan wondered whether to flee, but then he saw us and called us to stay. The Crusader Knights fought a brutal struggle. King Baldwin, who could barely stay in the saddle, was himself in the thick of battle, surrounded and protected by his men. Contemporary descriptions say he fought with such fury, as if there were no illness in him, as if the power of God flowed through him. With one hand he gripped his sword, the other barely worked due to the leprosy, and shouting he led his men forward. The Muslim army increasingly panicked. What had initially advanced as an orderly marching column now fragmented into chaotic masses. Saladin tried to rally his men, but the Crusader charge was too fast and too brutal. The elite Mamluk guard fought desperately, but more and more units began to scatter, and then something unexpected happened. In the rear of the Crusader army appeared those Templars and secular knights who had originally been serving in northern garrisons, but had now arrived at the king's call. There weren't many of them, perhaps 200 to 300 men, but their appearance at precisely the moment when the battle's outcome was still uncertain was fatal for Saladin's army. The Muslim soldiers believed the main Crusader force had arrived. Panic broke out. Successive units began to retreat, then flee. Saladin desperately tried to stop his men, but in vain. The chaos spread like an avalanche throughout the entire army. By sunset, the entire Muslim army began to flee. Contemporary Arab sources admit that the scale of the disaster was incomprehensible. Saladin himself only escaped by galloping off the battlefield with a few loyal bodyguards. Most of the army scattered in the desert. Many died during the pursuit or perished from thirst while fleeing. The Crusaders could not pursue them too far, as they themselves were exhausted, but nothing could question the completeness of the victory. Thousands of Muslim soldiers' bodies lay on the battlefield. Saladin's expensive tent, his treasury, his weapons, everything was left behind. The Crusaders' booty was enormous: gold, weapons, armor, horses, everything in abundance. But the most important thing was not the material gain. King Baldwin IV, a 16-year-old leprous boy whom his contemporaries had thought as good as dead, had defeated the greatest Muslim commander of his time. The news spread like wildfire across the Holy Land and throughout Europe. People spoke of a miracle, of divine intervention, that Christ himself had fought on the side of the Crusaders. William of Tyre, the king's former tutor, who later wrote about the events, put it this way: "On this day God showed his power. A boy whom disease had nearly destroyed led his army to a victory worthy of biblical heroes." Whoever saw King Baldwin on that day knew that no ordinary mortal was fighting there, but God's warrior angel. The consequences of the Battle of Montgisard were far-reaching. Saladin, who until then had seemed unstoppable, suffered a severe loss of prestige. It took him several years to gather his strength again and resume the offensive. The Kingdom of Jerusalem, which had been almost on the verge of collapse, now gained breathing room for more years. King Baldwin IV, who knew he didn't have much time left, continued his struggle against disease and the enemy. He ruled for 5 more years while his body gradually fell apart from leprosy. By 1182, he had gone completely blind. One hand had to be amputated, and he could only be carried on a litter. Yet until his death, in March 1185, at the age of 23, he maintained royal dignity and courage. The memory of the Battle of Montgisard outlived the Kingdom of Jerusalem, which later, after the catastrophic defeat at the Battle of Hattin in 1187, almost completely collapsed. But that day, when a dying boy defended the city of Christ's tomb against the seemingly invincible Sultan, remained forever one of the most defining moments of the Crusades. Modern historians still debate what exactly happened at Montgisard. Some say Saladin simply made a strategic error when he deployed his army scattered, without battle readiness. Others say the tactical brilliance of Crusader heavy cavalry and the element of surprise were decisive. And there are those who claim that Baldwin IV's personal charisma and courage had such an effect on his men that they were capable of seemingly impossible feats. But perhaps the truth is a combination of all these. A special moment when strategy, luck, human will, and, as contemporaries believed, divine grace worked together to create something that exceeded natural explanations. The Battle of Montgisard had not only military, but also cultural and psychological significance. For the Crusaders, it was proof that their mission was just, that God was with them, and that even in the most desperate situations there was hope. The figure of Baldwin IV became such a symbol that it outlived the Middle Ages, the dying king who nevertheless did not give up, who maintained his dignity and sense of duty even in the midst of suffering. For Saladin, Montgisard was a bitter lesson. It taught him never to underestimate his opponent, even when appearances suggest weakness or vulnerability. The Sultan later, at the peak of his career, when he had already recaptured Jerusalem in 1187, often told of that day when a leprous boy nearly killed him. According to Arab historians, he always spoke with respect of Baldwin IV's courage, even when they were enemies. The ultimate lesson of this story is perhaps that human will and courage can sometimes override cold calculations and probabilities. On November the 25th, 1177, a small Crusader army, led by a dying boy, achieved a victory that on paper seemed impossible, and thus saved Jerusalem, even if only for a few more years. If you enjoyed this stunning journey into the world of one of the Middle Ages' greatest battles, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and share this video with your friends. Hit the like button and write in the comments which moment was most moving for you. In the next video, we'll explore another exciting medieval adventure. See you soon, and let's continue together on the path of great historical discoveries. Don't let the magic of the Middle Ages slip away. Stay with us and discover those moments when the course of history turned on a single day.